So, if you dug a hole right now under one of the busiest, sun-drenched tourist streets in modern Ibiza,
Right, past all the concrete and asphalt.
exactly, past the concrete, the electrical grids, the discarded club flyers, you wouldn't find the foundations of some old resort. You would actually find a thousand-year-old traveler from Chad.
Wow.
Yeah, buried carefully facing Mecca and carrying the genetic ghost of leprosy. So today we are cracking open a biological time capsule. We're looking at a brand new research paper just published today, actually March 26, 2026,
Oh, hot off the presses.
literally today in the journal Nature Communications. And the mission of this deep dive is to take the ancient DNA extracted from a medieval Islamic cemetery in Ibiza and, use it to reconstruct this forgotten, incredibly diverse world from the 10th to the 12th centuries. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, it's a truly remarkable piece of research because it bridges two totally different worlds. I mean, we are taking traditional
It's
archaeology,
like the physical excavation of bones from the dirt.
exactly the actual digging, and we're layering it with cutting-edge genomics. And when you do that, you stop just, guessing at the history of human migration based on old texts or broken pottery fragments.
Right, the usual stuff.
Yeah. Instead, you can literally read the history of an island right out of the molecular structure of its past inhabitants. It's incredible.
It really is. And, we tend to think of medieval people as completely disconnected from the rest of the world.
Oh, absolutely. The isolated village myth.
Yes, we picture these isolated villages where people never traveled like more than 10 miles from where they were born. But the data we are about to go through proves that if you lived in medieval Ibiza, you were part of this massive globalized network.
Huge network, yeah.
So to really understand the scale of what scientists found, I think we need to look at the excavation itself first. So the year is 902 CE.
Right, the Umayyad Emirate.
Yeah, Ibiza gets conquered by the Umayyad Emirate of Córdoba, pulling the island into the vast sphere of Islamic rule. Fast forward to a modern construction project on a very busy road, Bartomeu Vicent Ramon Street.
Such a contrast.
I know, right? Workers are digging and they hit a maqbara, basically a main urban Muslim cemetery.
It was a substantial find, too. I mean, the excavation uncovered 125 individual burials dating from roughly 950 to 1150 CE.
Wow, 125.
Yeah. And what immediately stands out is just how uniform and deliberate the burials were. They were these simple earth pits known as the Darii type.
Okay.
And they adhered strictly to the Islamic funerary laws of the era, so the burials were entirely unadorned. I mean, there were no grand monuments, no elaborate coffins.
So very simple, very respectful.
Exactly. The skeletons were carefully placed on their right sides, specifically oriented so they would face southeast, directly toward Mecca.
And when you say unadorned, I mean you really mean it. Out of all 125 graves, the archaeologists found exactly one grave that contained any sort of objects.
Right, and it wasn't much.
No, it was just two simple silver rings. Everything else was just human remains. But, having 125 skeletons doesn't mean you have 125 viable DNA samples.
Oh, not at all.
Out of that entire cemetery, only 13 individuals yielded enough autosomal DNA for this genome-wide study.
Yeah, and that attrition rate, I mean, that really highlights how difficult ancient DNA extraction actually is. You have to remember, these bones have been sitting in Mediterranean soil for a millennium.
Right, it's not like a sterile lab environment.
Far from it. The initial osteological analysis, where scientists just physically examined the bones, that told us some baseline facts, like it showed a demographically mixed population.
Men, women, children.
Yep, and generally healthy,
Yeah.
with very little physical evidence of trauma or violence.
That's interesting for a frontier island.
It is. But, well, bones alone degrade over time, and they can only tell you about the macro-level life of the person. So to get the genomic profile, researchers had to look microscopically into the teeth.
It's so funny. It always seems to come down to the teeth in these ancient DNA studies.
It really does. Because the outer layer of the tooth, the enamel, is the hardest substance in the human body. It essentially acts as a biological vault.
A vault. I like that.
Yeah, it protects the dentine inside, which is the tissue that houses the pulp cavity. And that cavity is rich in blood vessels during life, making it this incredible reservoir for DNA.
So even if the skeleton itself is heavily degraded by the dirt and the water.
Exactly. The enamel seals that genetic material off from the elements. So by carefully drilling into those 13 viable teeth, Scientists extracted the DNA and began to sequence their genomes.
And once they mapped those genomes, the data just completely shattered the idea of an isolated island community. I mean, the analyses revealed extreme heterogeneity.
Well, a massive mix.
Yeah, we are looking at individuals carrying ancestry from Europe, from the Middle East, and heavily from North Africa. Specifically, Imazighen groups, which historically are often referred to as Berbers.
It was an absolute Mediterranean crossroads, just a total melting pot.
Yeah.
But identifying the geographic origins of the DNA is, only half the breakthrough. The researchers were also able to determine the timeline of when these different ancestries actually mixed.
Which blows my mind.
It's wild. The genetic data showed that the North African gene flow occurred exactly 2 to 7 generations before these specific individuals lived.
Which perfectly aligns with the historical record of the Umayyad conquest in 902 CE. But I actually want to pause on the mechanics of that because it sounds almost like magic.
It does sound like magic, yeah.
Wait, how can scientists calculate an exact admixture date like 869 CE just from looking at ancient DNA? I mean, if I mix blue and yellow paint to make green, you can't really look at the canvas and tell me exactly how many minutes ago I mixed them, right?
That's a great analogy. What's fascinating here is a concept called local ancestry covariance decay.
Okay, covariance decay, that's a mouthful.
It is. But we're essentially looking at how DNA recombines over time. So if we think of DNA like a deck of cards, let's say red cards represent European DNA and black cards represent North African DNA.
Okay, following.
If a person from Europe and a person from North Africa have a child, that first generation gets a perfectly split deck. They inherit half red cards and half black cards, and those cards are handed over in large, unbroken blocks.
Right, so the deck hasn't been shuffled much yet?
Precisely. But with every new generation that follows, a biological process called recombination shuffles that deck further. It breaks those initial massive chunks of regional DNA into smaller and smaller sequences.
So it basically chops up those unbroken segments over time.
Yes. It acts as a biological clock. The researchers measured the length of those unbroken ancestry tracks in the Ibiza skeletons.
And because the blocks were still fairly large.
Exactly, because they found relatively long sequences of North African DNA that hadn't been heavily chopped up by generation after generation of shuffling. They knew the mixing happened recently. They calculated it was roughly 7 to 8 generations prior.
Oh, wow. And if you use a standard generation time of, what, about 27 years?
Roughly, yeah.
That math traces the admixture date back to around 869 CE. Just a couple of decades before the Islamic conquest of Ibiza in 902 CE. That is, you are literally watching the invasion and settlement of an island written into the changing length of a DNA sequence.
It's staggering. And that same biological clock also highlighted the outliers in the cemetery.
My crew.
Well, individual S157, for example.
Yeah.
When researchers looked at his sequence, they found a much older admixture date, tracing back to around 519 CE.
Oh, so way earlier.
Way earlier. And he also possessed a notably higher amount of European ancestry compared to the rest of the group.
Which means his ancestors were mixing hundreds of years before the Islamic conquest even happened.
Right. His genetic profile points to older migrations, very likely tied to the massive demographic upheavals that swept across the Mediterranean right after the fall of the Roman Empire.
Which is a powerful reminder that, human movement isn't just a single event.
No, not at all.
It's this continuous overlapping series of waves. So we know they brought their diverse Mediterranean genetics across the sea. But the genomic data caught something else, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah. 2 specific individuals who came from much, much further away than North Africa or Europe.
Yes, 2 men labeled S.116 and S.197. They possessed distinct sub-Saharan African ancestry.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like finding a medieval passport with specific regional stamps that survived for 1,000 years.
That's exactly what it's like. And this is where the geographic scale of this community becomes truly staggering. Finding sub-Saharan DNA in a medieval cemetery on a Spanish island proves that these intercontinental networks were far more expansive than we usually visualize.
I understand finding the DNA, but how do scientists look at a sequence of molecules from a medieval bone and know exactly where in Africa that person's ancestors lived?
It really comes down to comparing the ancient genome against massive data sets of modern human DNA.
Oh, okay. Like a matching game.
Sort of. Over thousands of years, distinct populations develop unique genetic markers. Tiny mutations that act almost like geographical zip codes. By mapping the ancient sequences backward, researchers look for the highest concentration of matching markers in modern populations.
Wow.
So for individual S.197, those markers traced all the way back to Senegambia in West Africa.
That is incredibly far away. And individual S.117.
He showed strong genetic affinities with present-day southern Chad, which is a region characterized by Nilo-Saharan languages.
Chad is deep inland. I mean, the distance from southern Chad to the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean is immense. You have to cross the Sahara.
It is an incredible journey. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the genomic data beautifully validates the historical texts.
Right, because we have writings from that time.
We do. We have Arabic sources from this era that document vast trans-Saharan networks used for trade, military recruitment, and unfortunately the slave trade.
But texts can be exaggerated, right?
Yeah.
Or just focus on the elites.
Exactly. But finding these specific genetic signatures in the dirt of Ibiza provides direct biological proof of these routes. Ibiza wasn't just some sleepy island. It was a functioning node in a network that stretched all the way across the Sahara Desert.
Okay, but pinning down exactly when these two men lived brought up a really fascinating hurdle, specifically with radiocarbon dating.
Yes, the dating issue.
Because I know radiocarbon dating can get incredibly tricky when you are dealing with island populations. Something to do with the ocean's carbon cycle, right? The ocean acts as a massive sink for old carbon.
Yes, you're touching on the marine reservoir effect. The carbon-14 isotope decays at a known steady rate, which allows us to date ancient organic material.
Right, the standard carbon dating everyone hears about.
Right. However, the carbon in the ocean is significantly older than the carbon in the atmosphere.
Oh, I see.
So if an ancient person ate a diet heavily reliant on marine protein, which is highly likely for people living on a small island, they absorb that older ocean-based carbon directly into their bones.
So when a scientist, 1,000 years later, tests those bones, that lifetime of eating seafood essentially skews the results.
Exactly.
It makes the skeleton look significantly older than it actually is.
Yes, exactly. To get an accurate date, the researchers couldn't just take the raw radiocarbon number. They had to analyze the specific isotopes in the bones to determine exactly how much marine protein these men ate during their lives.
They can figure out their diet from the bone isotopes?
They can. And once they quantified the diet, they applied a mathematical correction, the marine reservoir correction, to basically adjust the date.
And once they ran that math, they proved that both men actually lived after the year 1115 CE. Which is a very specific date.
It is. And it aligns perfectly with a second major demographic pulse in the Balearic Islands.
What happened in 1115?
In 1115 CE, the Almoravid Empire, which had originated in what is now Mauritania and the Western Sahara, expanded and conquered the neighboring island of Majorca.
So a whole new wave of people.
Precisely. The arrival of these two men from Senegambia and Chad perfectly matches this second distinct wave of trans-Saharan influence reaching the Mediterranean.
So you have these massive distances being covered. You have military expansion, trans-Saharan trade, people from the deep inland of Africa arriving on a Mediterranean island.
It's bustling.
Yeah, but when human beings move across the globe like that, they aren't just moving their own genes, are they?
No. They are carrying microscopic ecosystems with them.
And that brings us to the field of ancient metagenomics, because the researchers didn't just sequence the human DNA from those teeth, they also searched the pulp cavity for non-human DNA.
Right, looking for the genetic signatures of the bacteria and viruses that were circulating in the bloodstreams of these people at the exact time of their death.
And they found something chilling in the tooth of individual S.313.
They did.
The metagenomic analysis tested positive for Mycobacterium leprae.
The pathogen that causes leprosy.
Exactly. But I have a logical question here. If this individual had leprosy, a disease that is historically famous for physically disfiguring the skeleton, why did the scientists need a DNA test to find it? Like, why didn't the initial physical examination of the bones catch it?
It is a great question. And the answer lies in how bones degrade in the earth over time.
Okay.
If you look at the preservation notes for skeleton S.313, you will see that this individual was entirely missing his facial bones. The skull had severely degraded in the soil over the last 1,000 years.
Oh, wow.
And the facial bones, specifically the nasal region and the upper jaw, those are exactly where leprosy leaves its most diagnostic telltale skeletal markers.
Oh, so because the face was physically gone, traditional osteology was entirely blind to the disease.
Exactly.
The pathogen's DNA, locked safely inside the enamel of that surviving tooth, acted like a biological flight recorder.
A flight recorder, yes.
Right. It told the scientists exactly what disease this person was fighting, filling in a massive blank that the physical wreckage of the bones simply couldn't show us.
It perfectly illustrates why these disciplines, archaeology and genomics, have to be combined. You need both.
Yeah.
But, the genomic data revealed more than just ancient pathogens crossing the desert.
What else did it show?
It also gave us a look into deeply personal family dynamics, specifically by measuring something called runs of homozygosity, or ROH.
Okay, ROH is essentially a way to measure genetic consanguinity, right? Or, well, inbreeding.
Yes.
Because if two parents are closely related, they share a lot of the same genetics. So when they have a child, they pass down identical blocks of DNA.
Exactly.
By scanning the genome and measuring the length and frequency of those identical blocks, scientists can calculate exactly how closely related an individual's parents were.
That is exactly how it works. Now, considering everything we've just discussed about how incredibly diverse and globally connected Ibiza was.
Right, with genetics from Europe, Chad, Senegal, the Middle East, all converging.
Right. You might expect the level of inbreeding to be virtually non-existent.
Yeah, you would assume the genetic pool was as mixed as it gets, just a free-for-all.
But the data showed the exact opposite for two specific individuals.
Really?
Yes. Skeletons S.131 and S.315 showed very high levels of genetic consanguinity. In fact, the runs of homozygosity in individual S.131 revealed that their parents were actually related at the first cousin level.
First cousins. Living on an island that was functioning as a global transit hub?
Yeah.
That seems like a massive paradox.
It seems like one, but it actually tells us a lot about the sociology of frontier communities. This raises an important question about how societies organize themselves under pressure.
How so?
Well, Ibiza was diverse, yes, but it was also a newly conquered island on the edge of an expanding empire. The high degree of relatedness suggests that amidst all this massive intercontinental transit, the people actually settling the island were forming tight-knit, endogamous communities.
So they were likely marrying within their specific clans or social groups?
Exactly.
I mean, it makes sense from a survival standpoint. If you are navigating a newly conquered land, marrying within your extended family is a way to consolidate resources.
Keep the land in the family.
Right, protect property, maintain cultural cohesion. You have this sweeping globalization empires rising, armies moving across the Sahara. But on the micro level, you have people forming deeply insular, close-knit families just to survive it.
And that tension between the vast global network and the insular local community is what directly shapes the everyday lives of these people.
So what does this all mean? If we synthesize everything we've looked at today, it completely redefines how we view this era. I mean, we started on a modern street in Ibiza,
Right.
dug down into the dirt, and found a story that spans continents. We tracked the expansion of the Umayyad Emirate through the biological clocks ticking inside human DNA.
Incredible to think about.
We followed the genetic footprints of two men across the vast expanse of the Sahara Desert, using the ocean's carbon cycle to pinpoint the exact century they arrived.
Yeah.
We used the microbial DNA locked in a single tooth to uncover the invisible spread of leprosy. And we mapped the tight-knit family structures of first cousins navigating a frontier world.
The overarching takeaway here is that the medieval world was not a series of static, isolated communities. The people buried in the Maqbara of Madina Yabisa lived at the very center of a vibrant, deeply interconnected web.
They really did.
And that leaves us with a somewhat provocative thought about the legacy of these connections.
Oh.
We've seen how global transit hubs like medieval Ibiza served as massive mixing bowls, not just for human populations, but for their pathogens.
Right. The leprosy in SS.313 proves that these microbes were actively hitching rides on the trade routes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which makes you wonder, as these ancient port cities constantly brought together divergent immune systems and new diseases from Europe, Africa, and the Middle East,
Yeah.
could the pathogens that circulated in these early melting pots have quietly sculpted the genetic immune systems of modern European population?
Oh, wow.
Are the natural immunities we carry today the direct evolutionary result of the unseen microscopic wars fought in the bustling streets of places like 11th century Ibiza?
That is a fascinating concept. Our own modern immune systems serving as the biological legacy of ancient globalized trade.
Exactly.
It proves that whether you are looking at the math of a biological clock, the geographic zip codes of a genome, or the ancient microbes surviving inside a tooth, the history beneath our feet is far more complex than we ever imagined. Thank you for taking this journey with us, and keep staying curious.